So I'm Jeremy Cooperstock. I'm a professor in electrical and computer engineering, so housed not only at the Center for Interdisciplinary Research in Music, Media and Technology, but also the Center for Intelligent Machines. And we have collaborations with electrical engineering, computer science, psychology, music, and so forth, spanning these different disciplines of CIRMMT. So the Multimodal Immersive Systems group has been dealing with issues involving different sensory modes of perception and communication. We've been dealing particularly with video in the last few years, but the group really began dealing with audio as the sort of beginning point for this research. And that involved initially transmission over the networks of high fidelity multi-channel sound. And later came to encompass additional modes such as vibrosensory or mechanical vibration information. And then most recently the use of video, progressing from highly encoded MPEG style streams to eventually far lower latency and higher quality uncompressed video, all the way up to uncompressed high definition. The work is complemented significantly by other researchers in the group, such as Professor Voschuk, who's dealing with radial sound arrays in terms of how we perceive and how we can basically reproduce the sound effects in a large environment that surround the users and give them as close as possible a feeling of so-called being there in a remote space. And this is complemented by adding the high-quality immersive video as well as high-quality vibrotactile or vibromechanical actuation, so feeling the floor rumble or feeling the response from a low-frequency instrument like a deep bass sound, and having those sort of resonance effects make their way through the system. We've been doing this sort of work in conjunction with colleagues and other research groups within CIRMMT, such as the psychology perception side. We've had collaborations, for example, with Professor Levitin, who's been looking at issues of how we perceive and how we make use of these different sensory cues, looking at issues of how latency affects our performance, how video quality and how audio perception change the way we respond to events. And this has been ongoing research and collaboration for the last several years. So one of our main projects that has really dominated the work of this group for the last several years has been our evolution towards higher fidelity immersive audio-visual and vibrotactile systems. This has culminated most recently in our Shared Spaces project that involves 3 large plasma displays spread across in front of the user as if it were basically a wall or a video window into a remote space. And the advantage of having this sort of a layout as opposed to a single screen is that the users, the participants, feel like they're really in the room with people rather than confined in front of a monitor, because just the sheer size and scope of this really gives them a sense of immersion. The other aspect which is so important is providing life-size video. So the participants really feel like they're talking to another individual rather than to a computer-based video conference representation. And this is augmented significantly by multi-channel sound, giving you the sense of multiple conversations taking place at different positions in the room. So CIRMMT's mandate is really to investigate all of the elements of sound, from the initial formation of sound through the instrument or through some force of nature, to its reproduction and transmission through air or through networks, to its reproduction through loudspeaker arrays or other sound generating devices, and ultimately to its perception in our ears and how our brain sort of responds to that. And the latter part of this element, in terms of the transmission or the network communication, has been a very dominant component of our work with respect to how do we deal with that transport, not just through air, which is the conventional medium we're used to experiencing sound, but actually over great distances using computer networks. And that's been a large focus of what our work has been dealing with. Now, in terms of how this really fits in with the CIRMMT mission, what we've been able to do is provide researchers locally as well as remotely the ability to collaborate and deal effectively with issues of perception and sound appreciation, or music generation, composition, performance in a distributed manner that would not otherwise be possible or effective. And one of the key factors to that is really reducing network delay, or the end-to-end latency of the system. Because if you're trying to perform music or even teach music at a distance, and the delay is such that you'll play a note and the remote participant won't hear it for another quarter of a second, that greatly impedes your ability to interact. So our major contribution in this area has really been in reducing delay through very aggressive software architectures, and in being basically greedy bandwidth hogs, in the sense that we blast the network with lots of uncompressed data in order to avoid the need for compression. And this has helped us to achieve various milestones in real-time performance. For example, a network violin duet across 2 universities in Montreal, and later we did a network jazz jam between Montreal and Stanford universities, where the performers were able to play together, not quite like they would be in physical co-presence, but sufficiently effectively that they enjoyed the performance or enjoyed jamming together to the point where the musicians didn't want to pack up and go home. Another area in which our research group fits in with the CIRMMT mission, in particular the interdisciplinarity of the research themes, has been our collaboration with some of the other principal axes, or the research groups involved. In particular, the perception, the sound modeling, and the gesture, musical gesture work have all had some connection or another to the different projects in our research theme over the last few years. In terms of the musical gesture, this is a very important area in our shared reality space and in the soundscape performance works that we've been involved in which we consider, for example, what it means for a performer or a musician to be moving around space and to be gesticulating, moving their arms, pointing at objects, grabbing elements and moving them around, and how the sort of body language can be conveyed through an artificial reproduction. In other words, a synthetically created musical space. So just as, for example, Professor Wanderley deals with issues of what musical gesture means with a handheld artificial, or sorry, a handheld novel or new instrument involving computer-generated effects, we consider how gesture would relate to synthetically created artifacts in space that one might not be able to feel tangibly, but rather you're interacting with an overall environment. The gesture plays a big role as well in overall shared reality, because we're talking in effect about users being able to manipulate their space, being able to understand what it means to be walking past an object, to be pointing to it, manipulating it, and so forth. And this leads very naturally to questions of perception, both in terms of auditory and visual understanding of our environments. So this is where the kind of cognitive and the perception of music themes play an important role. With respect to the output and the sound that is generated, both in the environments we have in terms of shared reality and soundscape, but also in the shared spaces sort of environment with large-scale video conference or these large video walls, we have questions as to what kinds of music can be performed effectively through the sound reproduction system. Does it feel natural? Does it sound like being in a remote space? And what are the kind of limitations in terms of distributed performance and distributed teaching that can be played out there?